Hello, and welcome to our session of the Christian Meditation Prayer Group of St Mary's Church in Killarney in County Kerry in Ireland. You're very welcome to join us. If you're watching the recording of this session, then you might like to take the opportunity for a moment to pause the video and remind yourself of the technique we use in our Christian meditation practice, which is described for you in the commentary box beneath the image of this video on the YouTube page. So, as I said, you're very welcome to join us today, and we will be commencing our meditation practice in a few moments. First of all, to say I hope you're feeling well and managing with the current difficulties and restrictions we're having at the moment in this coronavirus pandemic. One of the issues that many people face is the difficulty they experience with the restrictions and the inability to go about the usual activities of their normal life. And that creates for them particular issues of an undermining of their well-being. And so this Christian meditation practice can assist with calming that sense of undermining of the well-being which we enjoy at other times. So we're going to be commencing our meditation practice now. So we need to make sure that we're sitting comfortably but with a straight back and with our feet squarely on the floor. And we will take a few moments, having closed our eyes, to relax the body before commencing with our sacred word, our mantra, Maranatha, at the sound of the gong. And then at the end of the session, there will be a double gong sounding to invite you to let go of the sacred word, the mantra, but still keep the eyes closed as we bring our bodies back from deep relaxation. And then the final gong is the invitation to open our eyes gently so that we don't stress our bodies by a sudden influx of data through our eyes. So let us now close our eyes and relax our body. So I hope that meditation session was a benefit to you and that you have enjoyed it. Incidentally, if you have any questions or queries about the practice of meditation and the effects that it has upon us and the manner of our progress through the practice of meditation, then please write a question in the comment box beneath the video on the YouTube page, and I will endeavour to respond in a reasonable period of time, given that many of you might be watching a recording of this. So don't hesitate to do that, and I will have a look at the comments to see if there are any questions or queries that you might have. So for the second part of our session, we're going to be looking at one of the Psalms. The Psalm appointed for this evening is a section of Psalm 119, and it struck me particularly that this verse number 75 is relevant for us in our consideration of the practice of meditation and our journey of faith in the Spirit. The psalmist writes, "I know, O Lord, that your judgments are right, and that in very faithfulness you have caused me to be troubled." In very faithfulness you have caused me to be troubled. One of the things that strike people most strongly when they begin the practice of meditation in the Christian tradition or in any other of the world faith traditions in which this technique is practiced is the expectation that there is going to be tranquility and calm all the time in the meditation, and yet what they find is emotional and mental turmoil. And we know this ourselves in our practice, that more often than not we find that our meditation is populated by stray thoughts or emotional feelings or content, and that we are distracted by them. And as I often say, this is entirely to be expected and is a necessary and natural aspect of the process of meditation, and the way in which we actually benefit from the meditation because of the nature of the experience. But this particular verse struck me as significant because of the juxtaposition between the notion of God's faithfulness and the trouble or disturbance or disruption which we experience. In the verse in this translation, "In very faithfulness you have caused me to be troubled." We're not looking here at the historical source of the trouble or emotional negativity which we might feel, or the fact of the thoughts popping in and intruding upon our meditation, our sacred word. The essence here in this particular verse is the aspect of the present content of the experience, and the psalmist's words draw our attention to the nature of that in the present moment. God is being absolutely faithful in God's promise to us to draw us away from our capacity to be distanced from God. That the promise of God in God's faithfulness and God's trustworthiness to draw us into a permanent sense, an ever-present sense of the nature of our relationship and the comfort we gain from that, and indeed the energy and power which is given to us to maintain that sense of peace, that peace which is beyond understanding, in the midst of difficulty and turmoil outside and within. So this faithfulness is at its very heart, at its very core, in the essence of its meaning, essential to our understanding of the trouble which we feel. And the words of the psalmist are particularly poignant because the psalmist points to the fact that it is God's faithfulness that causes this awareness and this uprising of that trouble within us. And this is purely based on the notion that that faithfulness is bringing that trouble to the surface for our healing. That when it comes to the surface, it may evaporate because we are centered on the being present to God, and the way in which we engage in our meditation allows for the fact that faithfulness will then cause the trouble and the difficulty we might face in our minds and in our hearts to evaporate, to disappear, to dissolve like a wisp of cloud under the warming gaze of the sun. So that faithfulness is absolutely crucial and essential and necessary. And if we don't engage in the faithfulness of God, i.e. we don't present ourselves to God and make ourselves available that God's faithfulness may work within us, then there can be no evaporation of that difficulty and of that trouble and of that turmoil which we experience. So the two are part of the one, if you will. The essence and the nature of it are intimately and irrevocably connected for us. And this particular idea, this aspect which the psalmist draws our attention to, drew my mind to the notion of patterns. One of the things that excites my intellect and my thirst for knowledge is the presence of patterns. That's why mathematics is such a joy to me, that I find in mathematics the generation and the explication of patterns and capacity to engage within ourselves, within the nature of our being. These patterns that we see in nature, and these patterns which we see in our intellectual inquiry into nature, and our investigation of our own inner being, these patterns pop up all over the place, and they are, as it were, endemic to creation. And this idea of the patterns being endemic to creation suggests also that pattern is part of the essence of God, because God underpins existence. It is said by the great scholars and fathers of the faith that God doesn't exist because existence is about having being, about being created. And it is we who are created, it is time and space that has been created, and that is what existence is all about. And God underpins that. So it will be limiting for us to imagine that God existed as though God were a being. That is not the case. God is, as it were, beyond and underneath, and it is God that supports that concept. So it, in a sense, means that God is actually, in essence, somehow to be understood, to be apprehended, to be conceptually regarded as having forms of patterns. And we see patterns in the nature of the Trinity. We see patterns in the nature of on earth. So this idea of patterns then helps us to understand what the psalmist is about, because this is a pattern, God's faithfulness and the bringing out of our pain and difficulty, our tension and our trauma, and then the healing of it is, as it were, a Trinitarian pattern. That faithfulness is love and presence and the power of God. The bringing out of the difficulties we experience is our presence to God and our willingness to be open to God. And then the third part of that Trinity is the interaction between the two, which inevitably leads to healing. It inevitably causes our inadequacy to be made good in that particular aspect. And that is the core reason why we should throw ourselves into the practice of meditation. We should wholeheartedly long for and yearn for the moments in which we may meditate, because our engagement with God goes much deeper than our intellectual capacity to think on God, and our ability to know God rather than to know about God is empowered by the practice of our meditation. So this form of engagement is at a very deep level exactly what we are made for and exactly what we are intended to become. And therefore our meditation becomes for us a source of life, a source of healing, a source of engagement and interaction with the God that has made us. In the scriptures, God has made us, we are His. And therefore, in that engagement, we become one, in as far as it is possible for a human being to become one with God. As Jesus says, let them be one as we are one. So in this oneness, we are healed. And in our meditation, we find that capacity, that avenue, that way of engagement. So let meditation be for you a great joy and a great healing. And don't worry about the moments when it all feels too much, too difficult, too painful. Just stick in with it, and it will then bring you, eventually, sooner or later, to the place of peace. So, we end our session here this evening, and I want to thank you for joining us either by live streaming or with the recording, having engaged with it later. And thank you for joining us despite the limitations of time and space. I wish you well and look forward to seeing each of you in due course in person. But in the meantime, God bless you and keep you, and make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Amen.